The moment you go online, you are recorded as having gone online.
The fact of the matter is that we've already long ago given up much of our privacy as soon as we started to email and use mobile telephones. But if you thought about what it would be like if your neighbours knew details of your bank account or your medical record or could listen into your quarrels with your spouse, you would be very disconcerted because you would feel that you were losing control over areas of your life that just belong to you. That's why privacy really matters. And the great worry that we have in the digital age is that we've already given so much of it up, both to private agencies and to public ones.
Well, one way in which you'll give up personal information is obviously by clicking on one thing or another that reveals the sorts of things you're interested in. But how would they get from that to actually figuring out, for instance, who you are? Well, it's well known in the privacy world that things like your birth date, your gender, and your postal code or zip code will allow people to figure out who you actually are, what your true name is. Now, how might a website get that information from you? Well, let's say you want to sign up for a horoscope. Then you're going to give them your birth date and probably tell them whether or not you're a man or a woman. Then maybe you want to find out what your local weather is. Probably the easiest way to do that is to put in your postal code or zip code. And bingo, they've got 3 pieces of information that are going to make it really easy for them to figure out exactly who you are.
We should be very worried, I think, about the amount of data concerning ourselves, including very personal, private, intimate data about ourselves, which is now out there in the public domain, both in private and in public hands. We should be worried about it for a large number of reasons, but one central reason is that this information is stored digitally in one or another location out there in a way that we may not have access to ourselves. And it's very, very easily manipulated. It's very easily changed by somebody who is either lazy, incompetent, or malevolent in some way. It's very easy for that information to be shared and for patterns of information to seem to appear to certain agencies that could put one under suspicion even if one weren't a suspicious individual. In other words, the prospect for misinformation, for corruption of our personal information, and for mistakes to be made about our personal information is massively increased by the fact that there is so much of it out there and so much of it is collated by different agencies. Inefficiency and patchiness of information is a great protection of personal privacy. And the more efficient the systems are that collect and collate data about us, the more the potential is for mistake and misuse.
Well, there are a variety of threats to privacy online. The worst case scenario would be when information about a person is collected by a large, powerful institution, whether public or private, whether government or corporate, in a way that is used profoundly to their disadvantage, and where the individual has no control over the usage of that information. So it could be to conduct surveillance on people, and in fact, it is so much easier now to collect so much more information about what people do, what they read, what they see, what they buy, that in the hands of a government that has no respect for civil liberties, if you can imagine the sort of post-9/11 world run amok, there's an enormous threat that it would be used to silence political opposition and political opponents and enforce a kind of authoritarian regime. That's the scenario I worry about.
Most people are unaware of how exposed they've made themselves. Unaware every single day that we do something digital, we are potentially leaving a trace out there.
You leave a print, people know roughly where you're coming from, and they know you've entered a site. And once you've entered that site, it can say where you're going in that site, where you don't go in that site, what you look at, what you don't look at, what search terms that you use, what documents you decide to display, and how long you're there, and where you go next.
And that if somebody wanted to find out where we were shopping, what we were doing, who we were communicating with, why we were doing it, what websites we were logging on to, they could do it.
By putting all those things together, we can begin to develop characteristics of information-seeking behavior and use in cyberspace. It's very, very simple, and it's done automatically, which is the beauty. And anybody could do it, essentially.
It's a very, very exposed set of media, these electronic communication devices that we now use. And the point is that they're fantastically convenient. None of us would willingly give them up. But what we would want, if we really thought carefully about what it meant whenever we use these devices, we would want much, much greater individual security for our communications.
One of the issues around the privacy questions that are now being raised are, have we taught children how to be safe online enough? And are we, aware enough, if we've come at this later with technology, of all the different ways that information is used? So there's definitely a piece of education that needs to underpin all of the developments that are happening in technology.
Well, I think this generation has a sense that information wants to be free, and information about themselves wants to be free.
Young people, for example, who've got their own personal blog sites or their presence on YouTube or Facebook, and that they may come to regret doing some of the things they did on video on the internet, or saying the things that they did, especially when they start applying for jobs and employers begin to look back through the digital record of these people, the trace that they've left in the public domain.
It's hard to teach the relationship between privacy and democracy, and it's also hard to teach the relationship between intimacy and privacy.
Advertisers pay websites in order to put ads in front of them. The main sort of extra dimension on the web is that they're also paying for the information that they get from when you visit websites to help them decide which ads they want to target, where they want to put ads.
I think people are, whether explicitly or implicitly, pretty aware of what the trade-off is, and I don't think that's explicit. I don't think that's necessarily just for Google. I think as we go online, the deal is relatively straightforward. So when you go on Amazon and you click, and as you click through from product to product to product, you start to see the recommendations appear, either based on your past history or more typically your session. As you start looking for cameras, you start to see people who clicked, who looked at this also looked at that. People who bought this, people who clicked at this bought that. In the course of your clicking, the service becomes more useful to you. The implicit, and for many people the explicit trade-off, is that in exchange for watching over your shoulder as you shop, we will help you shop better. And no one seems to have any problem with this, because they trust Amazon, and this is if you go into a store and the store assistant says, "Can I help you?" And if the store assistant is good and you're feeling like you need help, you'll go through this little communication. Here's what I'm looking for. What do you think of that? What do you think of that? No, a little bit more of this. The advice will get better and better and better, and eventually you will get what you want. Amazon does this exact same thing. So there's nothing new about this trade-off. In the same way that you don't, that in the store, as the assistant helps you shop, you're choosing to give up information about your preferences for the sake of a better experience. You do so as well in Amazon. If you don't want to give up personal information, you just don't have to log in to Amazon. You can do it anonymously. Google works the same way. You type in your search term, Caribbean holiday, and Google will give you a useful set of results, and they will also give you some ads on the side. And as your term gets more and more specific, maybe a date range, a price range, and things like that, the ads will get more and more specific and more relevant. presumably at a certain point, not only are the search terms what you're looking for, but the ads are what you're looking for as well. And so you now have two sets of results to choose from. Now you can, if the one on the right side, the ads, is actually even better than the one in the middle column, you will choose that one and you will click there. But it's your choice. And so, Google knows what you're interested in right now. Do they know who you are? Do they have a profile of you? Not in any real sense. But they're watching as you click. But because we trust Google to watch for the right reason, which is to give us better results, we're okay with this.
I think that where it becomes tricky is when it's not totally transparent to you, the user, or there is no way of finding out. And I think that that's one of the areas that perhaps we're only beginning to grapple with now.
Google on the internet serves almost the same function as the World Bank in the globe. In other words, Google talks about everything being free, open source, and all shared. Google wants every system to be open. But what Google really wants is every system to be open to Google so that Google can serve ads through every piece of technology.
Is personal information more valuable than cash on the web?
It's hard to say just how valuable personal information on the web is. I think that most companies would rather have cash to start with, but the information is coming to them almost for free. That is, your clickstream data just comes to the website, comes to advertisers without your actually having to do anything other than just going and clicking on things. So it's a very, very cheap and unobtrusive form of currency. I mean, probably the best thing about it is that it is so unobtrusive. You don't know you're giving it up, and so it seems entirely free to you. And then the consequences of it, maybe you get certain kinds of ads, maybe you get telephone solicitations, but you have no way of knowing that that's because you clicked on 17 things on these 5 websites. And so whatever it is that you're paying for it, you don't really make a connection to the information you're giving up. And I think, frankly, people see cash, individuals see cash differently because it's something that comes straight out of their pocket. The information they give up, they don't see it leaving, and they don't know what anyone's doing with it. The web, the information stream goes both ways. When you click on something, they know you spend a certain amount of time on it. They may know you spent more time on an article about contraceptives than about breast cancer. And all this kind of information about what it is that you're interested in gets used by advertisers to figure out how they're going to target. And then it goes a step further, right? I mean, because they're building up essentially profiles. They're building up dossiers and files about the people who visit various websites. And they will be able to glean that, you're a person who likes to travel, you're a person who likes to cook, so on and so forth. And being able to target you as a person for those kinds of ads is, again, something that advertisers are willing to pay for.
I think that looking at the world through the lens of pure monetary value is not the right way to do it anymore. I think we now realize that there are other forms of value that we sometimes actually value even more. There's time, there's attention, there's reputation.
Every single time we go online, every time we look at a website, every time we send an email message, every time we make a phone call with our mobile telephones, we're exposing ourselves, we're stripping ourselves naked to the view of anybody who is interested to find out what we're doing. We know already that private agencies are keen to look at the pattern of use of the internet that we indulge in so that they can target advertising at us. And governments in the Western world, indeed in the world at large, are anxious to keep a record of who people are talking to, what kind of information they're finding out, so that they can detect patterns of, that suggest crime or terrorism in the offing. And in all these ways, therefore, we expose ourselves to view through the use of these devices. Not that we would want to give up using these devices, they're just so useful to us, but they do expose us to scrutiny.
We're no longer nourished but consumed in some way by what we've created. And I think that that's very, it's not all good. It's not all good. I see people in retreat as much as they are in advance now that they have all this information.